Imagine being the only one in the room who can't say, "He's alive," when everyone else is certain, and your faith is what's on the line. Now imagine the one you lost shows up and answers your exact demands, face to face. But will you reach for proof? Or fall into worship? The room is small, the air is close, and the doors are shut, not for comfort, but for fear. These men have watched their teacher executed, and now they're hiding in plain sight. Every creak of wood sounds like danger, and every breath feels too loud. Until someone speaks first, they keep repeating it like it's the only thing holding them together. "We have seen the Lord." Not a rumor. Not a wish. A claim with weight. Peter's voice is rough, John's gaze steady, and the others nod like witnesses under oath, and then they look at the one man who wasn't there. Thomas, called Didymus, hears their certainty and feels the gap open inside him. They have a moment he doesn't have. A sight he didn't see. And if grief has taught him anything, it's that hope can hurt worse than despair when it collapses again. So he chooses the safer pain. He says it plainly, no theatrics, no performance, just a boundary. Unless I see the mark of the nails, unless I put my finger into that mark, unless I put my hand into his side, I will not believe. It's not curiosity. It's a demand to meet reality the way they did. But what happens when heaven answers a demand like that? Notice what the story doesn't do. It doesn't mock him. It doesn't turn him into a lesson for everyone else to laugh at. It lets his words hang in the room, heavy and unresolved, because sometimes doubt isn't rebellion, it's the ache of being left out of joy you want to join. And the room stays locked. Days pass, and the fear doesn't vanish. They still gather behind shut doors, still listening for footsteps in the street. Thomas keeps showing up, but he stands slightly apart, like a man attending a feast while refusing to taste. The others carry a secret he can't borrow. Then John marks the time, after 8 days, same room, same shut door, same men. But now Thomas is there, and that changes the tension. Because if Jesus comes again, Thomas can't say he missed it. The air feels expectant, like the silence right before thunder. And nobody knows whether this will heal him or break him open. Then, without the latch lifting, without the wood groaning, Jesus is simply there, standing in their midst. No rushing, no spectacle. Presence crossing what fear tries to seal. And the first words out of his mouth aren't accusation. They're a gift, "Peace be unto you." But he isn't finished speaking. Jesus turns toward Thomas as if he's been listening all week. No one has to repeat the story, because Jesus repeats Thomas' own words back to him, exactly. "Reach here. See my hands. Reach here. Put your hand into my side." The room holds its breath, because this is the moment Thomas asked for. Think about the kindness inside that precision. Jesus doesn't shame him for needing what he needs. He meets him at the exact edge of his honesty. The invitation is real, hands extended, side exposed, but it's not a dare. It's mercy with a doorway built into it. And then Jesus speaks the pivot, "Be not faithless, but believing." John doesn't linger on the mechanics, whether Thomas touches or only sees. The gospel refuses to make the wound a spectacle. Instead, it rushes to the real miracle, what happens inside a man when the one he doubted refuses to withdraw. Thomas' shoulders drop like he's been carrying stone. And his mouth opens, not to argue, but to confess. He doesn't say, "You're alive." He doesn't say, "I was wrong." He says something far more personal, 2 titles, spoken directly to Jesus, as worship, "My Lord and my God." In that sentence, Thomas crosses the distance from secondhand testimony to surrendered allegiance. But Jesus answers in a way that reaches beyond the room. Jesus says, in effect, "You believe because you have seen." And then he speaks a blessing for people who will never stand in this locked room, never trace a scar with their finger, never hear his voice echo off stone walls. Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed. And that's where the story quietly turns toward us, because most of us live on "We have seen the Lord." We live on witness, on testimony passed hand to hand, generation to generation. And if we're honest, that can feel fragile when your own week has been long, when your own prayers have sounded like silence. Thomas gives language to that ache. But the question is, what does Jesus do with it? He doesn't crush it. He doesn't label Thomas a problem to remove. He steps into the sealed place, into the fear, into the locked door logic, into the room where everyone is trying to survive, and he brings peace first. That order matters: peace, then invitation, then transformation. But why does Jesus keep the scars at all? Those marks are identity. They say the risen Jesus is not a replacement, he is the same one who was crucified. The victory doesn't erase the suffering, it redeems it. And for Thomas, that means the resurrection isn't an escape from reality, it's reality healed. But there's another layer. Jesus uses the very evidence Thomas demanded to lead him past evidence. Because the goal isn't Thomas, you were right to require terms. The goal is Thomas, come home. The invitation is not just to inspect a wound, but to stop standing outside the circle of trust. Be not faithless, but believing. That line is gentle, but it's also a summons. And it raises a hard question: what if unbelief isn't lack of information, but refusal to yield? Thomas' doubt, in this story, is not treated like a clever argument. It's treated like a wound. He missed the moment, and now he's trying to protect himself from being fooled by hope. That's why his words are so specific: hands, side, marks. He wants certainty he can hold. But Jesus offers something more dangerous than certainty: relationship. And notice the relational detail. Jesus addresses him directly. Not someone tell Thomas. Not Thomas, why are you like this? Just a personal turning: Thomas, here. The risen Christ makes space for the struggler without letting the struggle become the throne. He doesn't reward disbelief, he rescues Thomas from it. But what does that rescue feel like in the moment? It feels like silence, thick, sacred silence, between invitation and response. A gap where Thomas could still retreat into pride, still demand more, still say, not enough. But he doesn't. Something in him collapses, not into shame, but into clarity. And when he finally speaks, it's not about the evidence. It's about who Jesus is to him: my Lord, my God. That confession is the summit of John's Gospel in miniature. Not merely teacher. Not merely Messiah. Thomas names Jesus with the titles that belong to ultimate authority and ultimate worth. And he says them personally: my. Doubt didn't have the final word, worship did. But Jesus' next sentence keeps the door open for every viewer who thinks, I wasn't there. Blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed. Jesus isn't insulting Thomas, he's widening the circle. He's saying faith is possible without your own locked room moment, without your own physical proof, because trustworthy witness is not nothing. The disciples we have seen the Lord becomes a bridge for the world. But bridges still require a step. If you're finding something here that puts words to your own questions, take a second and hit like, and consider subscribing, because we're building a space where faith is treated with reverence and honesty, not volume. And tell me in the comments, are you more like the group who says, we've seen, or like Thomas who says, I need to know? Because the next detail is the one most people miss. Here's what most people miss: Thomas isn't the villain of the story, he's the mirror. The gospel doesn't call him the doubter in this passage, it calls him one of the 12. He belongs even while he struggles. And that means your questions don't automatically exile you. But they do put you at a crossroads. Will you isolate, or will you stay close enough to be met? Thomas stayed. That's not small. He could have walked away from their certainty, called it hysteria, protected his pride. Instead, he kept returning to the locked room, week after week, living with the discomfort of not knowing. And in that stubborn proximity, grace found him. Sometimes the holiest thing you can do is refuse to leave the room before Jesus arrives. And Jesus arrives without theatrics. He doesn't need the door to open. He doesn't need Thomas to clean up his tone first. He steps into the center and speaks peace like a foundation. That's a pattern in John 20, fear gathers, doors shut, Jesus stands among them. If you're waiting for perfect conditions to believe, this scene gently says, He meets you inside imperfect ones. But don't miss the firmness in Jesus' tenderness. Be not faithless, but believing. He doesn't let Thomas camp permanently in suspicion. He invites him to move, out of self-protection, out of endless conditions, into trust. There's a moment when seeking becomes stalling. And Jesus, with calm authority, calls Thomas through that moment. The question is, what does believing actually look like here? It looks like surrendering the right to remain undecided. It looks like taking the evidence, yes, but letting it lead to a person, not just a conclusion. Thomas doesn't merely accept a fact, he gives himself to Jesus, my Lord. Authority. My God. Worship. The destination of proof is not pride. It's devotion. And that's why this confession lands like thunder in a quiet room. And then Jesus speaks that beatitude, blessed are they that have not seen, and yet have believed, and suddenly the camera isn't just on Thomas anymore. It's on every person who will read this story later with empty hands and a hungry heart. Jesus knows what it's like to be asked for proof. And he chooses to bless the ones who trust his witnesses anyway. But that blessing isn't abstract, it's an invitation to step into peace. Maybe your locked door isn't a wooden bar, it's disappointment, unanswered prayer, a loss that changed you, a fear you don't say out loud. The disciples' room was shut because they thought danger was outside. But the deeper danger was inside, the slow hardening into hopelessness. Jesus doesn't just appear, he stands in the midst. He makes himself the center again. And centers change everything around them. So what do we do with Thomas? We stop using him as an insult. We let him teach us how honest struggle can become holy confession when it stays close enough to be answered. Thomas doesn't end as the one who doubted. He ends as the one who spoke the clearest words in the room. And if Jesus can meet Thomas without humiliation, he can meet you without humiliation too, though he may still ask you to move. Because the story's arc is not doubt is bad. It's don't stay faithless. There's a difference between questions that reach for truth and a posture that refuses to be changed. Jesus doesn't punish Thomas for longing to know, he redirects that longing into belief. And belief, in John, is never just agreeing, it's receiving, trusting, abiding. Which means the real question isn't whether you've seen enough, but whether you're willing to say my. Thomas' confession doesn't erase the locked door, but it changes what the door means. Before, it was fear's boundary. After, it's just wood. Jesus is present either way. And the scars, those identifying marks, become not a reason to flinch, but a reason to trust. The one speaking peace is the one who went through death and came back with love still intact. And that's the quiet courage this passage offers to anyone still hiding. So if you're watching this and you feel like Thomas, the one who missed the moment, the one who can't borrow someone else's certainty, hear what the room heard, peace first. Not try harder, not stop asking, but peace. And then an invitation to believe. Thomas didn't climb his way into faith, he was met there. And the same Jesus who stepped into that shut room still steps into shut hearts. The only thing left is your response. Thomas' story ends where ours can begin, not with a demand, but with a confession, and a blessing for those who believe without seeing. If this episode helped you move even one step from fear to trust, subscribe for more scripture stories told with reverence and honesty. And if you want to mark your own confession today, comment "My Lord, my God" below. I read every single comment.